Hi, my name is Christina Marquez. I'm 29 years old, the CEO of a multi-million-dollar tech company. I manage over 200 employees. I've spoken at TED, and last month, I was featured on the cover of Forbes. But back in high school, I was invisible. Actually, no, not invisible. I was the punchline. The weird girl with thrift store clothes, messy hair, and no social circle. The girl you pushed into lockers, laughed at in the cafeteria, and voted most likely to stay a nobody. I used to cry myself to sleep, thinking that maybe they were right. But what they didn't know was that every cruel word they threw at me planted a seed. And today, I've grown into a tree they now work under. This isn't just a story of success, it's a story of justice. And it begins on the first day I stepped into that hallway. With my secondhand backpack, oversized hoodie, and a heart full of hope, let me take you back. The first time I walked into Millwood High, I was 14, holding a fraying backpack that used to belong to my cousin. My jeans were too short, and the sleeves of my hoodie swallowed my hands. I had braces, no phone, and my mom packed me lunch in a paper bag with my name written in purple marker. To most people, it was just a normal first day of school. But to me, it was war. I didn't speak much. I was shy, soft-spoken, and obsessed with books and coding. I used to write lines of HTML in the margins of my math homework just to pass the time. But none of that mattered to the kids at Millwood. What mattered to them was that I didn't wear Abercrombie, that I didn't have an iPhone, that my sneakers had holes in the sides. It didn't take long for them to give me a nickname, Crispy Christina. They said I looked like I'd been left too long in the microwave. I laughed it off the first time, pretended it didn't sting. But the truth is, it stayed with me. In the cafeteria, no one ever sat beside me. In gym, I was always the last one picked. And in the hallways, they whispered, loud enough for me to hear, "She's so weird. Who even is she? Probably lives in her computer." One time, someone wrote, "Geek virus," across my locker in red Sharpie. It stayed there for a week before anyone bothered to clean it. There was a trio who made it their mission to ruin me. Jessica, the queen bee with a perfect ponytail. Madison, her sidekick who laughed at everything she said. And Evan, the guy I had a tiny crush on before I realized he didn't see me as a person, just a punchline. They ruled that school like a courtroom, and I was always on trial. But while they partied, I stayed up learning JavaScript. While they posted selfies, I built websites. And while they laughed, I planned. In high school, popularity was currency, but I wasn't rich. Not in the way they measured it. They had sleepovers and beach trips. I had YouTube tutorials and late nights with a cracked laptop, screen. They had parties. I had Stack Overflow. While they flirted in the hallways, I debugged code. While they talked prom dresses, I designed an app that let local food banks track their inventory in real time. And no one noticed. No one cared, except one person, Ms. Adams, my computer science teacher. She pulled me aside after class one day, looked me in the eye, and said, "Christina, I hope you realize one day they'll wish they were you." I didn't believe her at the time, not even a little. But I never forgot her face when she said it. That spark, that quiet certainty. College was never an option for me. Not because I wasn't smart, because we couldn't afford it. So I built my own future from scratch. At 18, I launched my first real business, a small online marketplace for student artists to sell their work. It flopped. At 19, I tried again, a budgeting app for first-generation students. It got 300 downloads. Then nothing. At 20, I built a freelance platform for women in tech. That one changed everything. I called it Upstart Her. Clean UI, smart onboarding, real funding opportunities. I coded the back end myself for my studio apartment while eating ramen noodles and wearing the same 3 hoodies on rotation within 2 years. It was acquired for $8.4 million. And just like that, I was no longer invisible, but I wasn't out for revenge. Not yet, not until I saw her face on LinkedIn. Jessica Miller, Millwood High's royalty, my high school bully, applying for a junior HR position. At my company, I stared at the screen for a long time, then smiled. It was time to hold the interview myself. When Jessica Miller's name popped into our applicant tracking system, I almost thought it was a prank. But there, it was. Same face, same eyes, that signature polished hair. now with a little badge next to her name, seeking new opportunities. I clicked, view resume, no Ivy League, no fancy MBAs, just some stints in mid-tier companies, a layoff last fall, and a 3-month career break. She tried to pretty up with vague words like sabbatical and realignment. I could have ignored it, forwarded it to HR, let the system auto-reject her like thousands of other applicants. But I didn't. Instead, I opened the internal dashboard, selected manual review, and typed 4 words. Schedule with Christina Alvarez. My assistant pinged me seconds later. Are you sure you want to conduct this one personally? I wrote back with a single word. Yes. The day of the interview, I wore a black pantsuit, tailored to perfection. Not flashy, not loud, just sharp, powerfully quiet. The kind of outfit that says, I don't have to try to impress you. She walked in 5 minutes late. Classic Jessica, with a tight, forced smile and that I'm totally in control air. But something was different now. The shine had faded. The confidence was chipped. She looked tired, like life had stopped clapping for her somewhere along the way. I stood up, extended my hand. Jessica. Miller, I said calmly. It's been a while. Her face froze. She blinked, clearly scrambling through her mental archives. Then realization hit. Christina Alvarez? From Millwood? I nodded, still smiling. Please, have a seat. I could see the panic behind her eyes, the way her fingers gripped the handle of her purse, the little tremble when she sat. She thought she'd walked into a normal interview. She had no idea she was walking into her own karma. I opened her resume again, slowly. Let's begin. So, Jessica, I began, keeping my tone professional but cool. Walk me through what you've been doing since high school. She laughed nervously. Oh, wow. That feels like forever ago. Well, after graduation, I studied marketing at Hillside College, then interned at a fashion startup. I raised my hand gently. Let's go back for a second. Her eyebrows knit. Back? Yes, I said, folding my hands. To Millwood High. You were prom queen, weren't you? She blinked, thrown off. Yeah, I guess so. That's not usually part of the interview. I remember it clearly. I smiled. You crowned yourself with that tiara after dumping a milkshake on someone's project in art class. Her face flushed instantly. I didn't need to say it was my project. She knew. For a split second, the air went silent. Thick enough to slice. She shifted in her seat, adjusting her skirt like that might fix the past. That was a long time ago, she muttered. It was, I agreed, nodding. You were the queen of the cafeteria, captain of mock trial, voted most likely to succeed. She tried to smile, but it didn't land. Now you're here, interviewing for a mid-level role in the company I built from scratch. Her eyes flicked to the glass wall behind me, then to the awards on my shelf. She recognized one, my face on the cover of Forbes. I didn't know that I'd make it, I interrupted softly. Most people didn't. She dropped her gaze to the table. But I wasn't angry anymore, just clear. I'm not here to humiliate you, Jessica, I said. I'm here because I wanted to see how you'd handle walking into a room without being on top, how you'd handle being in front of someone you once made small. She stayed quiet. Because this company, I added, we don't hire titles. We hire character. And that was the moment she started to shrink. Because for the first time in her life, her last name, her charm, her history, they meant nothing here. Nothing at all. That night, I sat alone in my corner office, lights low, the city glowing beyond the glass. I couldn't stop thinking about the way Jessica's voice cracked. But then again, I remembered how mine used to. I remembered high school lunches, sitting alone while she and her friends shrieked with laughter across the cafeteria, the way they made Christina rhyme with loser, how they posted edited photos of me with future cat lady captions. Anonymously, of course. Only it was never anonymous. Not really. And now I was the woman deciding whether to sign her job offer. It should have felt like revenge. It didn't. It felt like clarity. The next morning, I took the elevator down to our in-house cafe. I needed coffee. Real coffee. Not the corporate kind. As I turned the corner, I froze. There she was, Jessica, not at a desk, not in a blazer, but behind the counter, wearing a branded apron. She'd taken a temp job in the cafe while waiting for the marketing role to be approved. I guess her bills couldn't wait. She turned and saw me. For a second, she looked like the queen bee again. Straight back, white teeth, perfect hair. Then she saw I wasn't just walking past. I was coming toward her. "Grande cold brew," I said, my voice calm, even, coming. "Right up," she murmured, eyes lowered, hands slightly shaking. I watched her pour, tap, slide the cup forward. No words, just quiet professionalism. But then I did something she didn't expect. I left a tip, a generous one. She looked at the screen, then at me. "You didn't have to." "I know," I replied. And then I said something else, softly but clearly. "By the way, the job's yours. You start Monday." Her eyes widened. "Wait, really?" I nodded, but one condition. "Anything," she breathed. "You treat every woman in this office better than you treated me in high school." She blinked, hard, and for the first time ever. Jessica didn't say a single word. She just nodded, quietly, gratefully. And suddenly the high school lunchroom felt like a lifetime ago, because now she wasn't at the table. She was serving it. Monday morning came with the kind of buzz only a big announcement can stir. I had just wrapped up a board call when my assistant, Mina, poked her head in. "Your 11 a.m. is here," she said, her eyebrows raised. "She's early," I smiled. "Let her in." Jessica walked through the door, wearing a conservative navy dress and heels slightly too high for someone unsure of the ground they stood on. She looked polished, but not the kind of polished that came from confidence, the kind that came from fear. Her resume was good, and she had the education. But I could see it now. Without her old social circle, Jessica was just normal. I gave her a tour, not because I had to, but because I wanted to see how she'd react. When we stepped into the marketing bullpen, I watched her glance nervously at the team. One by one, they looked up and waved politely. I noticed her face twitch when she spotted Rachel, one of our senior analysts, and someone Jessica used to mock for wearing thrift store skirts in school. Rachel smiled at her warmly. "Hey, welcome. I'm Rachel. I run analytics. Let me know if you need anything." Jessica's mouth opened slightly. She blinked, and then, "Hi, thank you. I remember you." There was a pause. Rachel smiled wider. "Yeah, I remember you too. Let's start fresh." As we left the bullpen, Jessica whispered, "I wasn't kind to her, was I?" I stopped, looked her in the eye. "No," I said. "You weren't." She nodded, biting the inside of her cheek. And that was the first real moment I believed she might change. Later that afternoon, I walked into the executive lounge for a quick coffee. The TV above the espresso machine was showing a business feature on women CEOs. Under 35. I sipped my drink, half distracted, until my own face came on screen. Christina Martinez, founder, CEO, valued at $18.26 million. The headline read, "From small-town outsider to corporate powerhouse." I heard a gasp, turned. It was one of the new interns, a girl in her early 20s. "Wait, you're Christina Martinez?" she asked, eyes wide. "Guilty to," I smiled. "That story, the one about how you started with nothing. I read about it last year. It's why I applied." That stopped me. Not the praise. I'd heard plenty. But the reason. Because once, I thought no one would ever see me. And now, young women were applying to be me. That evening, I stayed late at the office. The city skyline blinked in golden twilight through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the soft hum of printers and keyboards below had long since faded. It was quiet, the kind of quiet where you could hear your past breathing if you listened hard enough. I scrolled through an old folder on my laptop, and the one I rarely opened. Senior year, inside were scanned yearbook photos, essay drafts. I was too embarrassed to submit, and a handful of screenshots. Social media comments and messages from back then, the kind people don't think you'll ever save. The kind that say things like, "No wonder she eats alone. Christina thinks she's going somewhere. Lol. Maybe if she had real clothes, she wouldn't be invisible." It was surreal. Back then, those words stung like wasp bites to the soul. Now, they were paper ghosts. The next morning, we had our first full staff strategy meeting for Q2. The whole company was there. Marketing, design, product, support, finance. I stood at the front of the glass-walled conference room, remote in hand, a slide deck glowing behind me. As I began, I saw Jessica in the back row. She was taking notes, real ones. Her posture was different today. No stiff perfection, just presence. And next to her, Jason, my old high school tormentor, now reporting to someone who reports to me. He didn't make eye contact when I spoke, but I caught the glance. A flicker of something that wasn't exactly shame. It was smaller, quieter. Recognition after the presentation. As everyone filtered out, I heard a voice behind me. "You're good at this." I turned. It was Meaton. His hands were in his pockets, his tie slightly loosened. "You always were," he added, trying to offer a crooked, unsure smile. "We just didn't see it." I looked at him for a long moment. "You didn't want to see it," I said calmly. "There's a difference." He nodded. "You're right." There was no dramatic apology, no begging, just that. A moment of quiet reckoning. And honestly, that was enough. Not because it healed the scars, but because it proved I didn't need them to. A few weeks later, we held a team-building lunch. Something light to break up the pressure of quarterly goals. I usually skipped these kinds of things. I wasn't there to make friends. I was there to build something they'd never forget. But this time, I stayed. The venue was an open-air terrace on the 42nd floor. Everyone was seated at long, modern tables, laughing, swapping stories about client calls, and brainstorms gone wrong. The food was good, the weather perfect. And yet, part of me felt like I was 17 again, standing in the cafeteria with a tray in my hands, searching for a seat I wouldn't be mocked at. Funny how trauma makes you time travel. And then, just like that day back in high school, I saw Jessica. She waved. "Christina, come sit." It didn't sound forced. It didn't feel like charity. Just an empty seat beside her. I walked over, placed my plate down, and sat. She leaned in, softer than I ever remembered her being. "You know, back then, I think we knew who you could become, and that scared us." I said nothing, not because I was angry, because I knew that wasn't the full truth. Fear might have been a part of it, sure, but it was also cruelty, insecurity, immaturity, maybe even jealousy. Jason joined a moment later, sliding into the seat across from me. No bravado this time, no cocky smirk, just a guy eating grilled chicken in awkward silence. "Your presentation last week," he said eventually. "The one about launching the Gen Z initiative. It's the best thing I've seen here." Jessica nodded. "You're the reason this company feels like it has a future." I could have said something bitter, or reminded them of every time I sat alone with my sketchpad, or when they shoved my books off the table, or called me charity case. Instead, I smiled. Not for them, but for me. "Thanks," I said. "I'm just getting started." For the first time, it wasn't revenge that drove me. It was vision, and I had more of it than ever before. It was a rainy Tuesday morning when my assistant knocked on my office door with an apologetic expression. "Christina, there's someone here, without an appointment. She says she's desperate. Her name is—" She hesitated. "Melissa Carter." My pen froze. That name. It wasn't just a bully. She was the ringleader, the one who once filled my locker with shredded paper and notes that said, "You'll always be nothing." The one who laughed the loudest when my shoes broke in front of the whole school. I looked up. "Let her in!" Melissa walked. In drenched, no umbrella, a folder in hand, and eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in her before. Humility. She sat across from me, avoiding eye contact, and tried to speak through a rehearsed smile. "I heard your firm is hiring for the branding manager role. I brought my resume. I've been struggling to find stable work since the merger laid us off." I stood silent, watching her face as it contorted between nerves and shame. She continued, "Christina, I know I wasn't kind. In high school, I was horrible. But I've changed. I'm a mother now. I've had to fight for everything. And I'm not proud of who I was." The room was quiet, except for the rain tapping against the glass. "I judged you," she said. "I didn't know you were working nights, or that you took care of your dad. We just saw someone different and chose to make you feel small. That word, small. She finally met my eyes. But now, you're the one everyone looks up to, and I just want a chance to work, to prove I can be better. I looked at the resume in her hands. Her qualifications weren't bad. In fact, her background in creative agencies could bring value. But this moment, it wasn't about resumes. It was about power and what you choose to do with it once it's yours. I stood up, walked around the desk, reached for the folder. Melissa, I said calmly, we don't hire based on history. We hire based on hunger, grit, and vision. Her shoulders dropped slightly in relief. And I see it in you. Now, tears welled up in her eyes. She whispered, thank you. But I wasn't doing it for her. I was doing it because I remembered the girl she once broke, and the woman I had become, despite it. Melissa wasn't the only ghost from my past that walked into that office. 2 weeks later, I received another interview request. This time, it was Jacob Monroe, once the golden boy of our high school, the star quarterback with a cruel streak. He never threw punches, but his words left bruises. He used to mimic my clothes, my voice, even the way I walked. He made sure I always felt like a joke. Now, he was asking for a junior analyst position. When he walked into the room, his posture had changed. Gone was the arrogant swagger. In its place stood a man with a stiff suit, thinning hair, and the weight of his past written all over his face. He didn't recognize me at first. My name was now Christina Vega. Back in school, I was just Chris, the quiet girl with off-brand sneakers and dreams bigger than her backpack. Thank you for seeing me, he began, oblivious to the irony. You're welcome, I replied evenly. Tell me why you're interested in working with Vega Capital. He launched into a memorized pitch. Numbers, firms, a vague mention of entrepreneurial spirit. But something in his eyes was searching, not just for a job, but for redemption. Then, midway through his sentence, he paused. Wait. His brow furrowed. Christina Vega, you went to Milltown High? I tilted my head, the corners of my mouth barely lifting. I did. The silence was thick. He leaned back slowly. I owe you an apology, he said. For a lot. I wasn't just a jerk. I was cruel. And I thought it made me popular. But it just made me hollow. I nodded once. Apologies are heavy, Jacob. Not everyone can carry them. He swallowed hard. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just a chance to move forward. And that was the moment I realized something powerful. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to humiliate them the way they did me. I had already won. I had built something. I had survived. But most of all, I had become someone I respected. Thank you for being honest, I said. We'll review your application. If you're a fit, you'll hear from us. As he left, I sat alone in my glass-walled office, overlooking a skyline I once dreamed of from the window, of a crumbling apartment. I wasn't the scared girl hiding in the back of the class anymore. I was the woman who could look her past in the eye and choose peace. Not because I forgot, but because I'd grown. By the time Friday arrived, the office buzzed with the usual end-of-week energy. Laughter in the break room, clicks of keyboards, the occasional knock on glass conference room doors. But today was different. I'd called a full team meeting, all departments, all levels. The glass-walled conference room was packed. Interns stood in the back, senior associates checked their watches, and among them, Melissa and Jacob sat silently, avoiding each other's eyes, and definitely avoiding mine. I stood at the head of the room in my usual navy blazer, hands resting lightly on the edge of the table. But inside, a storm brewed. Not of anger, but of clarity. I tapped the screen. A simple slide came up. Who we are, what we stand for. I looked at them. All of them. I built Vega Capital from nothing, I began. No trust fund, no shortcuts, just grit, debt, and long nights no one saw. Some of you know what that's like, some of you don't. My eyes paused briefly on Melissa, then Jacob, then back to the group. This company isn't just about numbers. It's about values, respect, integrity, accountability, not because it looks good on a website, but because I lived without those things for years. In school, in early jobs, and I promised myself, when I finally built something of my own, I'd never let what happened to me happen to someone else under my roof. Silence. Heads nodded. A few glanced at each other, understanding something deeper now. I'm not perfect. Neither is this company. But what we don't tolerate, ever, is cruelty disguised as culture, gossip masked as bonding, and ego replacing empathy. Melissa's cheeks flushed. Jacob stared at the table, but I wasn't finished. I didn't call this meeting to humiliate anyone. I called it to set a tone because we are growing fast, and the way we grow matters. Then I smiled, not out of pride, but out of peace. Now, let's get back to work. We've got a world to change. Applause broke out, real, genuine, and as people filed out, a few nodded at me with something in their eyes that hadn't been there before. Respect. I stood at the window. A while longer, the city pulsing below. I wasn't that invisible girl anymore. I was a leader, and I was just getting started. Later that day, as the office began to settle into a rhythm again, I headed down to the cafe across the street, not because I needed the coffee. I already had one on my desk. But because I knew Melissa and Jacob went there for lunch, I wasn't following them. I wasn't stalking revenge. I was reclaiming my space. The bell over the door chimed as I stepped inside. There they were, sitting at the corner table where they always sat in high school too, when I'd passed them on my way to a library shift. Back then, they were the untouchables, the cool ones, the ones with the loud laughs and cruel jokes. I was the girl, with thrift store shoes and a secondhand bag full of books and broken dreams. Now, the room shifted when I walked in. I ordered an herbal tea, calm, controlled. Then I made a deliberate move. I sat at the table next to theirs, close enough to feel the weight of the past, but far enough to show I had no interest in revenge. Melissa noticed first. She froze mid-sip, her eyes locked onto me like a deer spotting headlights. Jacob followed her gaze and immediately looked down at his phone, pretending to scroll. The silence was delicious. A few minutes passed. I sipped my tea, checked an email, smiled as the waitress. The same one who had once seen me as the broke girl with coupons now addressed me as Miss Alvarez with a warm respect. I heard Melissa whisper, "I can't believe she's here," Jacob murmured. "I told you, she owns the place now." I could have said something, could have stood up, walked to their table, and returned every ounce of cruelty they ever threw at me, but I didn't, because the greatest power is knowing you no longer need to. I gathered my things, stood tall, and glanced their way for just a second, enough to meet Melissa's eyes and see all the regret, all the insecurity, all the realization. Then I smiled, not out of spite, out of freedom. They had built their identity on mocking others. I had built an empire, and in that moment, I didn't just walk out of that cafe. I walked away from the past. The following week, we hosted an executive leadership summit. An event I'd dreamed of organizing since the earliest days of my business plan, when I was still working nights and saving pennies in a jar labeled Someday. Now Someday had arrived, with a keynote speech, a city view rooftop, and a guest list full of powerful investors, media, and rising entrepreneurs. Melissa and Jacob, along with a few others from our junior marketing team, were invited to assist with the logistics, not because of their past, because of their performance. Let that be clear. I never wanted to rule out of bitterness. I wanted to lead from strength. And part of that strength was understanding who I was, not who they used to say I was. As the event unfolded, I saw Jacob walking around with a clipboard trying not to make eye contact. He hadn't spoken to me directly since that day in the cafe. Melissa, however, was assigned to greet guests at the entrance when I walked in with our keynote speaker, a venture capitalist who had believed in my app when it was just a sketch on a napkin. Melissa greeted him with enthusiasm, but when she saw me beside him, her smile faltered. "Welcome, Miss Alvarez," she said quietly. I gave her a nod. "Thank you, Melissa. You're doing a great job. Keep it up." It wasn't sarcasm. It wasn't fake. It was honest. Because here's the thing. Growth isn't about proving the world wrong. It's about proving yourself right, and then building a world so strong, even the people who doubted you want to be. Part of it, as the evening went on, I gave my speech. about innovation, perseverance, and how sometimes those who are underestimated become the ones everyone depends on. And when I finished, the applause wasn't just for my business. It was for the girl who sat alone at the lunch table, survived whispers in the hallway, and returned, not to fight, but to lead. A few days after the summit, I stayed late at the office, wrapping up investor reports. The building was quiet. Most of the team had already gone home. That's when I heard a soft knock on my door. Melissa stood there, holding a coffee. Her usual confidence looked smaller, like a version of her I hadn't seen since high school. No makeup, no loud tone, just her. "Can I come in?" she asked. I nodded, motioning to the seat across from my desk. She sat, silence stretching until she finally spoke. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Back then, in school, we were awful to you. I was awful to you." I stayed quiet, not because I wanted to punish her, but because I wanted her to take her time. She took a shaky breath. "It was jealousy. You were different, smart. But instead of admiring that, I made you small. Because I felt small." That part hit harder than I expected, not because I needed her apology, but because hearing the truth confirmed what I had always suspected, that their cruelty had never been about me. It had been about them. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I just wanted to say it. I see who you are now, and honestly, it inspires me." There it was. Not a grand, dramatic moment, not a public confession. Just two adults, both shaped by time, mistakes, and resilience. I gave her a small smile. "Thank you for saying that. It matters." She looked relieved, but still unsure. "I'll let you get back to work." As she stood and left, I felt a strange kind of peace settle in my chest. That apology didn't change the past. It didn't erase what happened, but it reminded me that sometimes people do change, and more importantly, that I had. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need validation. I had built something bigger than both, and no one could take that away. I stood in the boardroom of our newest headquarters, floor to ceiling windows flooding the space with golden afternoon light. The city stretched beyond the glass, like a reward earned one painful step at a time. Across from me sat a row of department leads. Three of them were people who had once laughed at my thrift store shoes, who used to drop notes in my locker calling me a freak, who turned their backs on me when I needed kindness the most. Now, they waited for my decision. We were in the middle of finalizing a major internal restructure, promotions, new leadership roles, a clean slate. And they all wanted in. I held their resumes in my hand, flipping through them slowly, not out of pettiness, but because I wanted to really see them, who they were now, what they brought to the table, who they had become when life stopped handing them everything. "Let me be clear," I said, meeting each gaze directly. "I don't hire based on the past. I hire based on who you are now, your work ethic, your loyalty, your growth." They nodded, some with hopeful eyes, others with the shame they never thought would catch up to them. "But if you think this company is a place for power games or ego," I let that hang. "You're in the wrong building." I passed the first resume back to a man who once locked me in a janitor's closet as a joke. "I've seen your numbers. You've improved. That matters. But don't forget how lucky you are to get this second chance." His hand shook slightly as he took it. I continued down the row, laying out promotions, denials, and new assignments, all with the calm, clear authority I had earned, not with revenge, but with results. Because this wasn't about humiliating anyone, it was about rewriting the rules. My rules. As the meeting ended and the team filed out, some grateful, some stunned, I stayed at the window. It wasn't about being the girl who finally got even. It was about being the woman who didn't need to. I had turned pain into power, humiliation into leadership, and silence into a legacy, not by becoming like them, but by becoming someone they'd never forget. My name is still Christina. I'm still that quiet girl who used to sit at the back of the class, the one they laughed at, mocked, and ignored. But today, that girl runs a company valued at over $120 million, funny, isn't it? The same girls who once flipped my lunch tray in front of the whole cafeteria now clock in at my office every morning. They look at me with forced smiles, eyes wide with a mix of fear and awe, And I don't need to humiliate them. I don't need revenge. Success did that for me. One of them, Jessica, once told me I'd never be beautiful enough, never rich enough, never important enough to matter. Last week, she asked for a raise. I approved it. Not because she deserved it, but because I do. Because I promised myself I'd never stoop to the level of those who tore me down. I walk through my building now with my head high. My employees greet me with real respect. Not because I scare them, but because I earned it. The girl they underestimated turned out to be their future boss, their safe job, their second chance. And that, right there, is the most poetic justice of all, because the truth is, they tried to break me in high school, but they ended up building the woman who now decides their promotions. I'm not angry anymore. I'm grateful, because without that pain, I wouldn't have built this empire. And to anyone out there who's being told you'll never be enough, don't fight them. Build so much they have to work for. You.